he would find her. And, you know, as a lot of Irish Americans do, the Irish America are very different from the Irish. And if you grow up in a strongly Irish American world, which Boston is, certainly in other cities, you do have a sense that that's Irish. And then you go to Ireland, and so many people have this same misconception, and then they realize that it's not Ireland at all, and it's very different in many, many ways. But anyway, and he realized that difference and felt it, and did have a lovely time on that trip. And he was standing there laughing, and he said, you know, everybody always is asking me what I'll do when I finish my 8 years in the White House, because I'll be too young a man to retire. And he said, and now I know. He said, just before I leave, I'm going to sign a piece of paper appointing myself the American ambassador to Ireland.
In Ireland, I think you see something of what is so great about the United States. And I must say that in the United States, through millions of your sons and daughters and cousins, 25 million, in fact, you see something of what is great about Ireland.
We could hear from afar off, over the loudspeakers, Kennedy arriving, his gradual procession from Wexford Park down to the Barry Memorial. And I remember my first impression of the cars, the motorcade sweeping in to Redmond Square. Kennedy standing upright in the car, waving to everybody in a marvellous exchange of goodwill and, should I say, happiness. But what startled me about Kennedy was that it almost appeared as if he had stepped out of a coloured television film.
And by now, he is really worked up. And he's talking about Ireland's chief export is not potatoes and linen, it's men and women who fought with heart and hand for liberty and justice all over this world. And he said, yesterday I visited that wall of shame. And that couldn't happen over here because you are the boys of Wexford who fought with heart and hand to burst in twain the galling chains and free your native land. They were wild. They're throwing hats up in the air and shouting, here, here, here. Because I said, my goodness, I hope Khrushchev isn't listening to this.
I am glad, therefore, that Ireland is moving in the mainstream of current world events. For I sincerely believe that your future is as promising as your past is proud, and that your destiny lies not as a peaceful island in a sea of troubles, but as a maker and a shaper of world peace.
I think what people may have forgotten about that Kennedy visit was it was almost like a royal progression with a court and courtiers and a lot of fanfare, helicopters flying all over the place. There was a huge air of excitement about it all. And that extended not just to the people of Ireland, but to the press of Ireland as well. I think that we didn't want to see any harm in anything that was going on. For instance, before Kennedy came here at all, a group of press people were sent over from the White House, and security people were sent over, and they were staying in the Intercontinental Hotel, what's now Jury's Hotel. And people were so hyped up about the whole thing, they were actually going up to have a look at the Secret Service men in the Intercontinental Hotel. And some fella in a bar, in one of the bars in Jury's, a few jars on him, said to one of these Secret Service men, you know, you fellas are just the effing new Romans. the Secret Service man pulled his gun on this fella. Now, it's an indication of how much goodwill there was towards it, that story never appeared in a single newspaper, not one.
An incident in Ivy House on Stephen's Green. He was at a dinner given by the Minister for External Affairs about 12:30 at night. He came out. There were thousands of people at that time around Stephen's Green. They were actually in the green, up on the trees, lampposts, railings, you name it, on one another's shoulders. He came out, he stood on the steps and everyone started clapping. He completely ignored the security, ran down the steps, over the cars, over the bonnet of a car actually, across the road and straight into the crowd of people. The people that were looking after him, the FBI and our own guards, were completely taken by surprise. It ended up where one particular guard on a motorbike had to turn into the crowd and try and surround them on his own to get the people away from him. Talking to the FBI, they were telling us the only thing they were worried about was that people were so friendly, they were clapping him on the back, shaking his hand, pulling and dragging at him, and they were terrified he'd be injured. Not purposely, accidentally, the people being so friendly.
So Ireland is still old Ireland, but it's found a new mission in the 1960s, and that is to lead the free world, to join with other countries of the free world, to do in the 60s what Ireland did in the early part of this century, and indeed has done for the last 800 years, and that is associate intimately with independence and freedom.
Just something I will never forget, really and truly. It was June, and it was a beautiful day, really. And myself and my husband and my son and daughter, we set off down to the Grand Parade. That was the only place we could get a place, really. And it was very warm the same day now, and I was pregnant at the time. And I'll always remember this woman gave me a seat, a little seat, you know, and I sat down. And I thought, really and truly, he was beautiful. He really and truly, I thought it was something I never forgot, really. I never will. You know, he was a beautiful man. And to see all the crowds with their stars and stripes, little flags, you know, they were selling them the same day in Cork. Cork was at a standstill, really and truly. You know, I think every shop in Cork City and every factory in Cork City were closed the same day. And it was really beautiful.
It was a strange time. I sometimes wonder whether we would be as naive now as we were then, whether Kennedy or any American president would get the same sort of welcome. But in those days, we certainly thought, here's this marvelous man, good looking, lovely teeth, lots of hair, quick intellect, beautiful wife, lovely children, an Irishman and a Catholic. I mean, this is terribly important. And he could have been any of our cousins.
No larger nation did more to keep Christianity and Western culture alive in their darkest centuries. No larger nation did more to spark the cause of American independence, and independence indeed around the world. And no larger nation has ever provided the world with more literary or artistic genius. This is an extraordinary country. George Bernard Shaw, speaking as an Irishman, summed up an approach to life. Other people, he said, see things and say, why? But I dream things that never were, and I say, why not?
We were waiting for him to come down to his car, and we saw my sister spotted Pierre Salinger, and his press secretary, and she said to go over and ask him for his autograph. So I went over to him and I said, could you get me President Kennedy's autograph? And he said, get it yourself. I said, you must be joking, how could I go and ask him for his autograph? No, he said, go over and get it yourself. That he's that type of man, he give it to you. He said, I have a paper and pencil ready, or a pen ready, and don't delay him. So I was waiting for him to come down, and when I got as far as his car, the Secret Service men, they shoved me away. No way, I couldn't go near him. So he sat into the car, and I held up the notebook and the barrel, and he did this to me. So I handed it over to him, and he signed the autograph and gave me a big smile and handed it back to me and drove away. So when he was gone, I was surrounded by photographers from all over the place, and journalists interviewing me, and it was my only 5 minutes to fame that I'll ever have.
For young people, it was an ideal, it was a vision that absolutely exhilarated them after the kind of bleakness of what they would be used to. And this was only the beginning of young people finding an identity of their own, and he was actually the beginning of a youth culture, that was followed on by pop music, particularly by the Beatles and by that whole area. And his setting up the Peace Corps, for instance, was an acknowledgement of youth as well. His whole appeal during his presidential address, which was riveting, the fact that this man used poetry, and particularly for Irish poetry, that he knew philosophy, and that poetry was so different from our usual concept of the politicians, and particularly maybe Irish politicians at that stage, that we were absolutely bowled over.
If the day was clear enough, and if you went down to the bay and you looked west, and your sight was good enough, you would see Boston, Massachusetts. And if you did, you'd see down working on the docks there Dohertys and Flahertys and Ryans and cousins of yours who have gone to Boston and made good. I wonder if you could perhaps let me know how many of you here have a relative in America who you would admit to, if you'd hold up your hand.
He fell in love with Galway. Every day there was something that added more joy. In Galway, there's such a crowd that when the helicopters taken off, some of them actually went into the bay, backing up, looking up in the wind of it, and he's going, look at down there. And they turned out all the boats, and Galway Bay never looked prettier. And they put on a good show. They had the Irish dances, and we have a film of Ireland, and it shows the president tapping his foot to the Irish dancing.
So then we got into the car. He had his own fleet of cars, of course. And on the way to the square, we passed my house, and I asked the president to wave to my mother, who was standing at the gate. And he asked the chauffeur at once to stop the car. He got out, he shook hands with my mother, and of course all the neighbours had gathered, and he shook hands with everyone. And actually my nephew had foreseen that this might happen, and he produced a book, an old book on the presidents of the US, and John F. Kennedy signed the book.